And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, once again coming to you on a Free to Choose Friday in partnership with the Washington Examiner, bringing engaging, intelligent talk, saying style, and indeed making sense out of nonsense, just as the great Biff Gore sings. Good to be with you today. It's sort of a season finale. We're going to take a couple of weeks vacation here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We'll be back on September 21st with an exceptional lineup. I'm excited for what we have in store in a couple of weeks, so be sure to tune in then. We're not going anywhere but a couple of weeks vacation. So good to be with you again on a Free to Choose Friday. Once more, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. If you have not done so already, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And also, be sure to follow the Facebook page, to like us on Facebook. Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro takes you to the Jimmy Sengenberger media personality page, and jimmyatthecrossroads.com, the place to go for all of our content from the show, my op-eds and columns, and more. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, all those good things to our friends at the Washington Examiner on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and of course at WashingtonExaminer.com. It is Friday. It's the Friday before Labor Day. We hope you have a great Labor Day weekend and are glad to have you along for the ride on this Free to Choose Friday. And that's what I want to begin with right now. Every Friday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we do Free to Choose Friday because we believe that you are free to think, free to act, and free to choose. It's fundamental. Why Free to Choose Friday? That's one of the big reasons. The other big reason is because our patron economist here on this program is the great late Milton Friedman, who published a book called Free to Choose, and of course had his television series Free to Choose, which always began like this. On Free to Choose Friday, we celebrate our ability as free-thinking individuals to choose. Again, you're free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And you ought to be. But implicit in that is that you are an individual who is capable of making your own decisions and thinking through your own problems and your own situations. There's a phenomenon that has, in recent decades, swept across America, starting on college campuses and in academia and expanding well beyond that now into the much broader society. A phenomenon called identity politics. Today, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we're going to focus in on the idea of identity politics. We will talk with Mike Gonzalez, author of the brand new book, The Plot to Change America. He's also a fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And I'm very much looking forward to talking with him because this book is absolutely fascinating. It really delves into the history of identity politics, understanding its foundations, delving into its implications, and also talking about how we can stop it in its path. Identity politics, you see, stands in stark contrast, stands against the very idea of individualism, because it groups people together by some sort of idea of race or ethnicity. And as Mike Gonzalez documents in The Plot to Change America, that identification group might just be a fabrication, something made out of whole cloth by academics or self-interested individuals who have some financial motive or some political motive. That's why we're really going to delve into this identity politics question, more than just the idea that, gosh, it's wrong and it's causing problems and some of the violence in our streets right now can be put at the feet of identity politics. But it is because it stands against individualism and the very ideals upon which this country was based, that you as an individual, who is, again, free to think, free to act, and free to choose, can better your own life. It suggests that if you are part of a certain group that has been disadvantaged, then you have it tougher, and therefore you have a victimhood status, and the government and society should act accordingly. It diminishes your value as an individual, and it is a scourge. It is a scourge upon our society. Make no mistake about it. And one of the problems with this, too, is the idea that there are implications that come from identity politics that suggest you must act a certain way. You must speak a certain way. Well, Milton Friedman in Cut 2 had some thoughts on this idea of the freedom not to act that I think are especially relevant to this discussion of identity politics.
We want freedom, in my opinion. First, because we cannot know. We can never be sure we're right. And therefore, we have no right to force our views on other people. And second, because the thing that's really important is the individual's own values and his own beliefs. If you're not free to sin, then neither are you free to be virtuous. Virtue is a meaningless concept unless an individual has a free will to choose between one act and another. You and I might think very, very well of that individual if he jumped in and tried to rescue the man sinking. And we will impose that value on him through the social process whereby we construct values and transmit them to one another. A good society will certainly be one in which people in that position will be strongly inclined to move out and try to rescue the man there. But that's a very different question from saying that if the society is bad, we can make it good by using force to drive him out there to bring the other man in.
Identity politics nowadays is prevalent in government, in academics, K through 12 education, and in higher education, now even in the corporate world. And again, implicit in identity politics is this idea that you must act a certain way, that you must treat certain people in certain ways. For example, as though a minority group is a victim. And you must have that in your mind. You must act in a way which acknowledges your white privilege, perhaps. You must avoid microaggressions. The list goes on. Those are ideas that imply a certain type of behavior is virtuous, and you must act in that way. We cannot allow sin. You cannot allow somebody to act differently from how the elites have determined society must be conducted from an identitarian standpoint. We must group people among their different racial or ethnic identities, and we must treat them differently given this. Sometimes benefits may be accrued because you are part of a sort of victim class. That is the idea of identity politics, fundamentally. And it also suppresses the idea of freedom of speech. In Cut 3, Milton Friedman talked about why freedom of speech truly is so important. And if you cannot express your own views freely because you are concerned about some social constructs that are being presented to you as how you must act in accordance with, that is to say, you must abide these social constructs, then you're not able to truly and freely express yourself.
We believe the whole justification for free press, for free speech, for our whole system of adversary justice, the whole justification is that people will be best able to distinguish truth from falsity if they have an opportunity to hear a variety of different opinions. Now, if you only have one opinion spoken, to shift grounds, if we go to the Soviet Union, the people in the Soviet Union are enormously skeptical about what they hear from their government. But they cannot know the truth because they don't hear it. They have to conjecture what is the truth because they only hear one side. They don't believe that. Don't misunderstand me. They become experts at reading between the lines. But they still don't have access to the full variety of opinion which would enable them to choose and decide intelligently and reasonably about what's right. So let's by all means have a clash of opinion. Let different beliefs clash in the marketplace of ideas. But let's not have a monopoly or a subsidization of one brand of ideas versus another.
And yet, when it comes to identity politics, isn't that what we're getting? Prioritization and subsidization of one brand of ideas? And that is the idea that identity politics is the name of the game. That we must group people along certain lines, and that we must treat them differently, given the ways in which we are dividing those individuals. Because they're not really individuals, they are part of groups. And if you dissent from this idea, you just might be ostracized. Now, it's gotten pretty damn bad on college campuses and in media, in K through 12 education, in the corporate world. The list goes on in terms of dissenting. But this is nothing new. It's just gotten worse over time. I want to take you back, 2010, a decade ago. I was a student at Regis University, and I was perspectives editor of the Highlander newspaper, where I would often, on an issue-by-issue basis, publish conservative-themed articles on issues of the day. And sometimes I would take on topics that I knew might be a little more controversial, push back, provide some alternative perspectives. Sometimes I might go a little more middle of the road, so to speak. But they were always from a more conservative or libertarian-esque standpoint. Well, in November of 2010, I published an article in the Highlander, the student newspaper, Regis University in North Denver, Colorado, entitled The Inherent Divisiveness of Diversity. Now, the focus of this piece was on Diversity Week. Back then, before I heard anything of white privilege or microaggressions, the buzzword really was just diversity. We had an office of diversity, and there was this emphasis on diversity. And every year during the fall, there would be a Diversity Week. And I decided I wanted to challenge this idea because I felt that there was too much of a focus on dividing people along racial and ethnic lines instead of intellectual diversity. The idea that we have different perspectives that may be informed by our life experiences or our lived experiences among a certain race or ethnicity. And I wanted to share a few excerpts because I think that my experience in 2010 is sort of instructive about how far gone we have really become. Let's put it up on the screen here. Here are a couple of excerpts. I note that this country, that is the United States of America, has a storied history of being a melting pot, where people from all walks of life came, assimilated, or acculturated into society and formed one great American culture rich in a vast wealth of experiences. But over the past few decades, we have seen ourselves transformed from a melting pot into a salad bowl, where our differences have become far more prevalent than our similarities. I go on to say that it's not the specific aspects of Diversity Week that I take issue with, but the modern conception of diversity and the very idea of a Diversity Week in the first place, and why we have to set aside a period of time specifically for discussion of such issues. Is it necessary to accomplish these objectives by celebrating differences, as though we need to clearly delineate that someone is Asian American or African American or Muslim or gay and so on? It seems to me that by continually reinforcing our cultural differences instead of focusing on what binds us together, we may generate greater division than we ought to. And I just want to say that that's exactly what has happened over the past decade. We have seen greater divisions transpire in this country as a result of emphasizing this concept of diversity along racial, ethnic, and other lines of similar nature. We have to keep that in mind, that the situation, again, has gotten worse over time. Let's put back on the screen, please, Mr. Matoush. I worry that the more we continue to push this idea of differences as making us better, the more we fracture ourselves and begin to lose our joint heritage. This is not to say that diversity and cultural differences in and of themselves are bad. Quite the contrary. In fact, our diverse traits enrich our thought processes through individual experiences. But though our characteristics have directed our experiences, and our experiences in turn inform our views, those characteristics should not provide the principal guide for discussions of diversity. What I was saying there back in 2010 in this student newspaper article is that we shouldn't dismiss somebody's lived experiences given a certain race or ethnicity. They inform your views, but it is your views and how those experiences inform your perspective that is really what matters. Let me read one more passage from this article, The Inherent Divisiveness of Diversity. Focusing on the differences of ethnic, racial, and other identities diverts attention from ideas themselves, the main force of progress and social change. And in an educational institution like Regis especially, the expression of varying perspectives to develop informed, concrete, defendable viewpoints is what really matters. To be intellectually diverse is to acknowledge that not everyone agrees with you. Rather, it means that we recognize the difference in perspectives and are open to alternative viewpoints and their presentation and to thoughtful dialogue. The most effective educational leaders stimulate thought and respectful debate, not simply shouts of amen. The important thing is to realize that what really matters is the differences of opinion and openness to them, not physical or biological characteristics. The latter attributes merely inform our experiences and our views, and we shouldn't have to devote a day or a week to the practice. So that article, it's not the entirety of the piece, of course, but that article spurred quite a controversy back in 2010. Interestingly, there were calls for me to be fired from the Regis University student newspaper staff. There were discussions going on in sociology and anthropology classes and accusations of racism and bigotry for simply saying, look, we should be focusing on intellectual diversity and how your own lived experiences from race and ethnicity may play into that is relevant insofar as it informs your views. I mean, that was fundamentally what I was saying. I suggested we have a unity week in addition to a diversity week. What was so interesting, too, was a Chilean immigrant professor of mine who was a self-described socialist, and he was the faculty advisor for the student newspaper. He was puzzled. Why is there such a controversy? This makes perfect sense. I completely agree. Again, Chilean immigrant, self-described socialist. We hardly agreed on anything. In fact, one day in Spanish class, we argued about Milton Friedman in Spanish. Don't have me debate you in Spanish anymore. I'm very rusty. But we literally debated Milton Friedman in Spanish with the other students looking around like, what's going on here? But the point is, it spurred a bit of a controversy. I was never fired from the campus newspaper. On my Regis University radio show, I actually held a full-hour discussion where I had students, faculty come on the program and challenge my views. And we had a discussion that one liberal friend of mine said, that's so civil, NPR wouldn't have you. Because that's what racist bigots do. They engage in genuine conversation with those with whom they disagree, right? No. The difference here is I was actually willing to engage and have a conversation, and other students were, and faculty were, calling into the program. Student body vice president came in to the radio studio, and we had a discussion. I thought it was very constructive. I actually accomplished the goal that I wanted, which was to get a discussion going more than anything. But now things are much worse. I talked to students and faculty at Regis, and they say, Jimmy, there's no way you could do the radio show or the kind of articles that you published at Regis today because of the political climate, and especially when it comes to issues of identity politics. It is a dangerous path that we find ourselves going down. Yoda's saying is true. Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. He's right. Unless it's not too late. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe he is wrong. Maybe we can turn back the clock. Mike Gonzalez thinks so. We'll have to see what happens. But we all have to do our part. We're going to take a break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But as we continue with our conversation today, think about what my experience at Regis University in 2010 was like. Think about the emphasis on diversity and now how it has expanded beyond that into white privilege and microaggressions and other concepts that fit in with diversity politics. And think about the divisions that we're seeing play out across the country right now in terms of the violence and the chaos and the destruction that in many ways lie at the feet of identity politics. Those are perspectives we need to keep in mind, or aspects of this story we need to keep in mind as we talk with Mike Gonzalez, author of the new book, The Plot to Change America, and delve in deeper into the idea of identity politics and how it has grown and manifested itself in American society today. We must be mindful and we must be wary. We must also know exactly what's going on and how to combat it. It is our duty. Keep it right here. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Don't go anywhere.
Safe, unsafe. Very safe, completely unsafe. Extremely insanely safe. X Games unsafe. Who's there? What do you want?
It's me, Arnold. Don Trump, I need to ask you a favor. I need you to stop using my quotes and my movie titles in your speeches. When you talk to the public, it gives them the wrong idea that somehow I support you.
I can do whatever I want. I am, after all, Commander-in-Chief.
Ah, that's what I mean right there. You can't just blatantly rip people off. That is a movie that I was in, not you, me.
I can do as I wish, as I totally recall.
See what I mean? That was a great movie I did with Jamie Lee Curtis and James Cameron, and neither one of those two support you, and now you're using that. You can't keep on doing this.
That's
it's exactly
the media true lie right there.
That's what I mean. You can't say that.
I don't know. Whatever became of us, Arnold? We used to be like brothers, like twins.
That's the last straw. I can't take it anymore. There's something wrong with you. You must have something in your brain.
It's not a tumor.
That's it. That's from kindergarten cop. You can't steal that.
You know what? You're fired.
You can't fire me. I don't work for you anymore. I quit.
I want you to get Pence on the line right away, Mike Pence. We're gonna send him down to Mar-a-Lago, and we're gonna put a stop to this Arnold business. Tell him to run. Go. Get to the chopper.
I heard that. Knock it off now, or I'll be back. Unlike you in 2020, I'll be back.
Get him out.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain finds himself up against a worthy adversary, a meteor maid.
Oh, come on. I was only in there 2 parsecs.
You can't double park here. You're in a twilight zone.
I didn't see the signpost up ahead.
Plus, your plates are expired.
Hold on. I've got an idea. This is not the double-parked starship you are looking for.
This is not the... Oh, come on, really? You're gonna try and pull mind tricks? What do I look like, a Gungan?
Misa thought it would work.
Here you go, Captain Schnook.
Ah, womp rats. A summons?
See you in court.
You mean I gotta come back all the way across the galaxy? Oh, look. This is right in the middle of Ponfar. And if I miss it, it's another 7 years.
Tough tribbles.
Well, was the captain really parked in a twilight zone? Will there be a twist ending? Tune in next time when we hear...
Look, maybe we can, work something out.
What do you have in mind?
A couple passes to the Space of Palooza Festival. Free parking.
I will see you in court. You will pay in full. Sign here, please.
You will see me in court. I will pay in full. I have signed here.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
What the How does she do that?
On Starship Winkler.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next. I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy. Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
Wait.
Mr. Simpson.
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Over here.
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomburger.
It's Sangenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year.
Do
you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol, from the makers of Triggerol.
And ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to your host of the Crossroads, Mr. Sang Style, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Yes, indeed, folks. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, rocking and rolling along. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, here with you on a Free to Choose Friday, and it is indeed such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. As always, we're still working to get Mike Gonzalez on the program here. He is author of the brand new book, The Plot to Change America, which is just a fascinating read about identity politics and where things are at in our society today vis-a-vis this concept, which we've been talking about today and zeroing in on, of identity politics. And one of the leading guys who's been speaking out publicly about identity politics of late in the last few years is especially, I don't know, he seems to be a public face for opposition to identity politics. And what we're seeing on the identitarian left is psychologist Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. And he had an interview from, I think this was last year, on an Australian radio station, where he particularly explained the dangers of dividing people up using identity politics. And what this really does, not only to society and to average everyday people, but even the left, the folks who are identitarians themselves. In cut 4, we've got Dr. Jordan B. Peterson answering this question and talking a little bit about the dangers of identity politics.
I think that it would be better if people tried to solve some real problems instead of playing these idiot diversity games. I think that everyone who plays identity politics, whether they play it on the right or the left, is going to pay for it in ways they can hardly imagine. It's a very counterproductive way of dividing up the world. It's impossible to come to a peaceful solution in the identity politics universe. Even the identity politics types themselves, they've run into this problem they call intersectionality, right? So, okay, so you classify people by race and by sex, let's say. So, and seek for equity along those dimensions. But then, well, what about the intersection between those dimensions? So you have enough ethnic minorities in your organization, let's say. You match by population, which is a foolish way of doing it, but you do that. And maybe you're matched by sex. But then, well, what about the intersection between race and sex? Well, and then what about the intersection between race, sex, ethnicity. Then you could add social class to that. Then you could add social proclivity. Then you could add attractiveness. There's a never-ending way of dividing people up into groups, and you can't equalize across all those ways. It's just technically not possible.
Exactly right, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. When we talk about identity politics, where do you go? How far do you go in dividing people up? Which groups really should take priority and why? In the end, the most oppressed group is the individual. Individuals face strife. Individuals face trials and tribulations and challenges. And in the United States of America as well, we are focused on the individual because we believe in individual rights. We believe in individual liberty. That is the ticket. That is the key to a free society. And that's where we need to stay in the United States of America. Here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we always enjoy the opportunity to talk with exceptional guests and individuals who are really providing some engaging and fascinating topics of conversation. I want to see if our guest can hear me okay. Are we looking, Mr. Matoush, like we are set to go here? Mike Gonzalez, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you very well.
Excellent. So let me give a proper introduction here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We've been working through some gremlins in the system, as it were, technically speaking. I am very pleased on this Free to Choose Friday, as we delve into the topic of identity politics, to be joined by the author of a fascinating new book. Let's put it on the screen, entitled The Plot to Change America: How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. Its author, a scholar at the Heritage Foundation, Mike Gonzalez, joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure to join you. Welcome to my study here at home.
Looks wonderful. I love the collection of books. Whenever we have a guest on who has a wide selection of books, you know that they are well read, which, by the way, really does show up in your book, The Plot to Change America. You go through so much detail historically and understanding the roots of identity politics and how we got to where we are today. But I want to start with a very basic question with you, sir, and that is, what is identity politics really? How would you define it?
Thank you for asking that question. That allows us to start from the beginning. It is a division of society into groups that are based on race, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, disability status, anything that confers a claim or a degree of victimhood on a member of the group that allows them to then demand attention or respect, or restitution, or compensatory justice, or any kind of reward. Obviously, one problem with it is that it puts victimhood on a hamster wheel. Although the hamster never tires, keeps running. If you derive rewards and respect from your victimhood, you have zero incentive to solve anything. Much worse than that is that the ideologues, the activists who create this whole thing, mean to have then the groups, the collectives, use that grievance as an incentive to change society. The promise is that though you cannot solve your own problem individually, you cannot end your victimhood individually, you can end it if you act collectively by completely transforming society. That's why identity politics is the thread that it is. That, in a nutshell, is identity politics.
One of the things, though, that's fascinating about identity politics in terms of its development over time, as you document in your book, Mike Gonzalez, is the fact that in a lot of these cases, these groupings that we have, even Hispanics or Mexican Americans, are groupings that were created sort of out of whole cloth by academics or others with particular interests to create those groups back in the 50s and 60s, that time period. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I would say that Mexican Americans is a real group. It refers to a culture, a country. Mexico exists. Mexico has a vibrant culture. That is not the case for Hispanics.
Right.
Hispanics is completely cobbled out of whole cloth by the activists. They insisted on it for reasons that were purely political. and ideological. They insisted that the government officialize this, give it official credence, and then not just that, but demand through the census and other surveys that everybody that is thus cataloged say they are Hispanic or identify as Hispanic, and then they confer benefits upon members who claim this as an incentive to adhere to membership. So that is, and at the time, I mean, they speak about it in terms of, don't worry, there will be amnesia about this. There will be a nationwide amnesia. People will forget that it is artificial and synthetic, and will think it has been around since Roman times. But no, it's a synthetic category cobbled out of many different peoples with who oftentimes don't share ethnicity or race or culture. Culture is very important. Even so for example, for medical research, now we're talking about COVID-19, Hispanic is proving to be completely unusable because there are no Hispanics can be from many different races with many different many different reactions to disease and many different cultures. So if you say, well, let's give Hispanics priority for a vaccine, that doesn't make sense in a sense.
So one thing that I think is worth talking about is why they would even want to group people in these particular ways. I mean, what's the benefit that comes to society from this type of division, at least as they would like to present it, Mike Gonzalez?
Well, because of what I spoke about earlier, because of the sense of victimhood, the grievance, the public law in 1977, Public Law 94311, that was originated by Congressman Roy Ball, said that he talked about discrimination as the one thing that united all the members of the Hispanic pan-ethnicity. So once you create this and you kind of reward people for joining it, then you instill into the members of this group a sense of victimhood and grievance and resentment against society. You can then use the collective to change American society. If you tell the members of this group or any group, because it happens with all the groups, that America is systemically, institutionally, and structurally racist, that is an incentive to then transform all the institutions, the structures, and the system of society. And that is the plot that I talk about in my book, The Plot to Change America. And I go into it also in an essay that I have today in Law and Liberty.
So when we talk about grouping people up and conferring certain benefits to them and also categorizing them in these victim classes, one thing that this erodes is, and you talk about this term of false consciousness. They basically are saying, look, if you think as an individual that you are capable of doing more things even when you're part of this group, then you have a false consciousness that denies your victimhood. Speak to that, because I think it's a very important component to this discussion of identity politics.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a very live example, something that happened yesterday. A writer from NPR in Miami wrote a blog calling a Cuban-American journalist at the Miami Herald racist for daring to tell the quarterback, Tannehill, that no, America was not founded on racist principles. And then this writer for NPR in Miami, NPR, we're all paid for it. We're all forced to pay for it. He goes on to say that all the Cuban Americans and Venezuelan Americans in Miami are, in essence, he didn't use those terms, are guilty of false consciousness. They're conservative. They're not acting according to the script that has been handed to the members of this category. And he goes on to imply that Cuban Americans and Venezuelan Americans in South Florida are racist because they're conservative. This is the essence of false consciousness. And obviously, false consciousness, you have to go back to Karl Marx, and then it's refined by Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist leader in the 1920s.
Again, we're talking with Mike Gonzalez, author of the brand new book. Let's put it up on the screen again, please, Mr. Matoush. The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. So let's discuss for a moment about the real world implications of this, because we're not just talking in some academic sense. We're now talking about in government, ever expansively so. We're talking about K through 12 education. We are talking about higher education. We're talking about the corporate world now. How has identity politics been manifesting itself? Let's say in the last decade. For example, I was just sharing a situation that I had, an experience I had in 2010, so a decade ago, when I was a student at Regis University in Denver and published an article challenging the idea as presented on the campus at the time of diversity. I hadn't really heard some of the concepts like white privilege or microaggressions and things along those lines until after I had graduated. Diversity was the buzzword then. I was at least able to publish that article. I talked with students and faculty at Regis who say you couldn't do that again now in the year 2020. So things have certainly changed and I think gotten worse over the last decade. But let's talk for a moment about how identity politics has really manifested itself in the real world right now, Mike.
Well, let's just go back just the last 10 weeks. We don't have to go back the last decade. You have these so-called anti-racism trainings taking place in all agencies of the federal government and across corporate America. They bill themselves as anti-racist, but in fact they're very racist. What they say, and they use charts to say this. They say this explicitly, that hard work or delayed gratification or punctuality or the use of reason is a trait of whiteness. Even the Museum of African American History and Culture used a chart saying these things, these very things that I'm describing, until public outcry forced them to remove it and they apologized. But this is being taught, being trained into members of Congress, into members of corporate America, and to feel, to tell, so everything is seen as, all of life is seen as a conflict between the oppressed and their oppressors.
Yes.
So they tell the so-called oppressed, look, you're victims of one of the worst countries in the world. You need to change it. And then they tell the so-called oppressors, no, you are really guilty and you have to apologize even though you have done nothing wrong. You have to auto-label yourself a racist. This is really something that was last seen in the self-criticisms of the Cultural Revolution. This is happening. Just one last thing. Robin DiAngelo, the writer of White Fragility, who gets $12,000 for $15,000 for a 2-hour seminar, recently had a conference call with 184 members of the House of Representatives. She is spreading this this poison to our leaders, and she says herself that she hates capitalism, that capitalism is racist, which is a complete falsehood. It's the opposite of the truth. But she is not the only one. All these consultants, Ibram Kendi, they all say the same thing, that capitalism is racist and we must replace it.
Yeah, well, here's something that's so striking. When we're talking about this idea of diminishing people, which is what's happening. I mean, if you're saying that an individual in a group is part of that group and therefore is disadvantaged, if they think that they are capable of bettering themselves, that's false consciousness. Going to your idea that what's being taught in these seminars for the government and corporate worlds is racist, I think it's a very critical point that gets to the heart of the matter here, is that here on Jimmy at the Crossroads on Fridays, we are celebrating Free to Choose Fridays, which is all about the individual being free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And if you diminish that person down to being part of a group as a part of being an individual who's capable on their own terms, then you are being, in effect, racist towards that person by saying, nope, you are incapable of being better on your own terms. You need our society to do it for you.
No, this is you have it exactly right. In Robin DiAngelo, in her book, she says we must cease to think in terms of individuals. The group membership was important. So this is a very clear transfer from individual to group member. The unit that has the agency is the group, the collective. Yes. The individual they even acknowledge that the individual may be able to improve his own lot in life. But what they say is, if you improve your own lot in life, you're not changing society. What we need to do is change society. They want to change society. They want to. The individual is the legacy of the Enlightenment. We start out with the individual in our founding, in the Declaration, in the Constitution. because that is an inheritance that comes from William Blackstone, from John Locke, from Montesquieu, from all the thinkers of the Enlightenment. The new thinkers, Gramsci, Marcuse, and the founders of Black Lives Matter, Angela Davis, all the people who are leading this charge today, or who have influenced the people who are leading this charge today, are very explicit that they are at war with the Enlightenment. They want to replace the Enlightenment and its values. One of the problems with that is that all our rights, our right to free speech, our right to conscience, our right to free association will just be thrown out because we got that from the Enlightenment.
Again, we're talking with Mike Gonzalez, author of the new book, The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. One of the sort of academic ideas that supposedly underpins identity politics is this notion of critical theory, which we're seeing expand into various cross-sections of life beyond just the academic world now. I would like for you to please talk a little bit about that, because I think to understand identity politics and where we're at now, and then know where we're going to go and how to stop it, we have to understand sort of the fundamental thinking behind these wrong ideas.
So critical theory is the philosophy of identity politics. If you're in school today, or you have a child in school, and they go into law school, they're studying critical legal theory. In the humanities, they're studying critical race theory. Any critical studies, any ethnic studies, is part of critical theory. So it's completely taken over the academy. It starts out in 1937 with a book by Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno called Traditional Theory and Critical Theory. In it, they describe what critical theory is. Critical theory becomes an unremitting attack, a non-ending criticism of all the norms and traditions of society. Except they don't criticize Stalin and the Soviet Union, even though this is at the height of the famines and the show trials and the massacres. They only criticize the West, the United States, religion, the nation state, and capitalism. But today, it's America and the story of America that is being submitted to an unremitting attack. You see this with the 1619 Project of the New York Times. You see this with all the ethnic studies that are now going to be mandated K through 12 in California, and then after that in California state university system.
What's so striking about what you're describing is that it's sort of like saying the United States of America is a nation that is perpetually sinful. We need to fundamentally change American society, and you really want to get people to think badly about their own country so that they will engage in radical changes, which is why this is so prominent on the left, because they want to change the structure of our society. And so in order to do that, you have to persuade people that fundamentally our society is messed up and flawed.
This is very important, Jimmy. You have to get this across to your listeners. This could do the country in. We're right now, the battle's not over, but we are at a decisive moment. And the people who are promoting this have the wind at their back. And we have to explain the utter racism, the nihilism that is behind all this. This is a thought pattern, a philosophy, which does not believe in truth and falsehood. It believes in narratives that you have a hegemonic narrative, and then you have the counter narrative, and they're engaged in smashing the hegemonic narrative and replacing it with a counter narrative. They have no time for truth. This is Nietzscheism, and in fact, I'm going to blow your mind here. Today, you have the founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors and Alicia Garza. Their main mentor is Angela Davis. Angela Davis, the Black Panther member of the Communist Party. Her main mentor was Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse taught her at Brandeis. His mentor was Martin Heidegger, a philosopher in Germany who was a member of the Nazi Party. And what he taught was Nietzsche. He taught Nietzsche in nihilism, and he was very good friends with Nietzsche's sister, also a member of the Nazi Party, and he was himself the head of the Nietzsche archives in the 1930s in Germany. So you have a genealogy that goes from Nietzsche, the biggest nihilist, to the founders of Black Lives Matter today.
Let's talk a little bit about what can be done and where we're at, how far gone we really are, because while it seems like we are too far gone, and there's no way that we can turn back the clock, given how ingrained this seems to have become in our government and in our society and in the corporate world and so forth. Are you optimistic? Because it sounds like in your book that you believe that if certain steps are taken, we really can turn back the clock.
Well, I am optimistic. The reason I speak the way I do and I write the things I do is to wake up our population. You know, Milton Friedman used to say, you need to have the right environment of ideas. If you have the wrong environment, even the good politicians will be persuaded to do the bad thing. But if you have the right environment, even the bad politicians will do the right thing. So I'll try to wake up the American public as to what is at stake here. But no, I am optimistic. I think that we can take back the culture and society. We can, for example, we can get the government out of creating categories. It has no business creating ethnic categories. We should leave that to the scientists, to the anthropologists. We should also stop giving benefits for people to be members of groups. We have just yesterday, I believe, at George Washington University, a professor who came out and said she has passed for being a Latina all her life, but she's actually not that. She is a normal non-Hispanic white, and she did this for benefits. And then in the Washington Post story today, people are decrying this, or her colleagues, and they're saying she teaches Latin American history, and they're saying hopefully they'll get somebody else, somebody from the Latin American community. They don't understand that this mindset that only somebody with ancestry in Latin America can teach Latin American history is precisely why somebody lies and tries to pass herself as something she's not. Knowledge, ideas do not inhere in our DNA. That is a very bad, very, very sinful idea to think that goes nowhere good very fast.
Well, the most it seems that you're allowed to be if you're not part of a particular group is what's called an ally, Mike Gonzalez.
Yeah, that is the question that I always ask. Ally, why? Are we at war? Because you only have allies in a war. But that is their mindset. They see all of society through the prism of a conflict between warring oppressors and the oppressed. And that is not what life is.
Yeah, one of the things when it comes to fixing this problem, to addressing the issue of identity politics that you really spend a lot of time on in your book, The Plot to Change America, Mike Gonzalez, is education. And it's so critical to look at education because we have kids who are coming up in the K-12 public school system who are already being inundated with these ideas. And then when they get to college, it's basically a time to reinforce those sort of ideas so you can go out to the real world and bring this kind of change to society to improve and better society. But the reality is what you are seeing is not just these concepts being talked about, but also in terms of teaching styles. This idea you talk about in the book of culturally responsive teaching, we see that there are achievement gaps between white students and various groups of minority groups of students. And the idea behind addressing achievement gaps under this idea of culturally responsive teaching is not let's help these students to better understand the concepts of math or reading or whatever they're struggling in, but instead we need to teach the ideas differently to that group because they learn differently because of their certain racial or ethnic background. And it just was stunning to me to read that portion of your book because understanding that you need to improve the quality of education, you should come at it from the perspective, let's actually make sure students are learning, not giving them some sort of justification for a handicap, I guess.
It's mind-boggling. It is this racist stuff that would make a member of the KKK blush, to say this stuff that the people of a certain race or group can only think in one way. I just read the report that was handed to Governor Northam in Virginia this week on how to change the educational system in Virginia. It mentions Frederick Douglass, a hero, an American hero, 4 times. Guess how many times it mentions cultural responsive teaching? Take a guess.
1,000. No, it's probably a little bit of a exaggeration, but 80.
80 times.
Gosh.
80
4
times.
for Frederick Douglass and 80 for culturally responsive teacher. We talked
Yes.
a lot about Frederick Douglass on the 4th of July.
A hero that should be taught to all our students, an American hero. Now, he shouldn't be secluded in African American studies. This is somebody who every American should learn when they study American history.
Right. Well, and instead what they do, and the radical left, is they'll tear down a statue of Frederick Douglass because they're not learning about him and what he really did for the United States of America, and especially for the freedom that was needed for slaves.
Right. I get goosebumps even thinking about it. The greatest abolitionist.
It's truly remarkable. One thing that I think we want to get at with regards to education, because you lived the first 12 years of your life in Cuba. And of course, that was as Fidel Castro was taking hold and expanding his power base in Cuba. Education is something that the left has always learned they can and should use in order to make these kinds of fundamental transformations of their societies and their government systems.
Yeah, education is key. And that's why the studies that have been done on what is happening in faculties of education, in schools of ed, they show that their curriculum is completely taken over by critical theory. It is the leading textbook in schools of ed is Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And all I have to say to you is that the former terrorist Bill Ayers, who was with the Weather on the Ground in the 60s, when he finally beat the rap and found out that he was not going to go to prison, what he decided to do was go to Columbia University, get a PhD on education, and he has devoted himself to educational writing about education and about curricula. This is the way to change society, not by placing bombs in a business, in a building, but by doing this.
Yeah. Well, and it's important to talk when we're discussing education about what can be done in order to reform it. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Mike Gonzalez, in 2 suggestions that you make for education. One is restoring civics education in our schools, because it's fundamental to understand just the basics of this country. They haven't been taught thoroughly in K through 12 education. I used to run a nonprofit for several years that worked in K through 12, particularly 5th grade, and teachers are woefully inadequate when it comes to resources available to them. They're not making them available, and they're not teaching teachers what to teach and so forth when it comes to civics ed, but also school choice. So civics education expansion and school choice. Talk to us a little more about that.
Well, for example, you see the complete lack of civics. By the way, civics right now, the left has also changed that. It's taken it away from studying history, studying how America was made, how our government is actually settled, how the different branches, the division of power. They don't teach that. They teach marching in the street. They teach activism. That is civics to the left. But you see that today in full blossom when you see, for example, the people in the 1619 Project, which is a curriculum as well, and they say that African Americans were not part of the compact in America in 76 or in 87 when the Constitution was debated and written. That is the same argument that Justice Roger Taney made in writing Dred Scott when he denies Black Americans not just a franchise, but citizenship, because he says they were not part of the original compact. That is the kind of racist language that was used by John C. Calhoun, the main defender of slavery in the early part of the 19th century. Abraham Lincoln was so outraged by Dred Scott that he gave a great speech in 1858 in Chicago, in which he said, no, this is completely wrong. He laid it out. He was a great student of the Declaration and of the founding. So this is completely wrong. The Declaration, that all men are created equal, applied to all Americans, applied to all men even. So when you don't understand this, and when your sense of history comes from 1619 or from Howard Zinn, you then repeat the same things that Justice Taney said, the same racist bad stuff.
But with that, I can't help but scratch my head and be befuddled thinking about how these people are the anti-racists when they're perpetuating this kind of dogma.
I just don't even understand it, because Ibram Kendi, the writer of How to Be an Anti-Racist, he says, black and white in his book, that you must have discrimination, that you have to have discrimination. And that is, look, we've tried separate but equal during the era of Plessy versus Ferguson, that whole 100 years of Jim Crow. It was awful. There was a lot of human suffering that took place. A lot of it was a tragedy. The Civil Rights Act and movement was supposed to get this behind us. The biggest tragedy is that Kennedy's Executive Order 10925, which first mentions the word affirmative action, and he instructs federal contractors to make sure that decisions are made without regard to race or national origin or ethnicity, then gets turned on its head by his successor LBJ into making decisions with regard to race, ethnicity, national origin, and sex.
Again, we're talking with Mike Gonzalez, just a few minutes left, author of the new book, The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. And I want to broaden the solutions discussion out to a term that you use in the book called the Civil Rights Movement 2.0. Fundamentally, Mike Gonzalez, what does that mean we need to be looking for from a new civil rights movement in order to right the ship and actually address racial issues appropriately and responsibly?
Well, we have to, for example, and I think this is going to come to the Supreme Court very soon, and I think it will win. We have to end discrimination against Asian Americans. Americans, not mainland, not students that come from mainland China, who are the children of the party cadre, the princelings. I'm talking about Americans whose ancestors were born in China or Korea or Japan or wherever. This idea that they can be discriminated against because otherwise they would enter Harvard and Yale and Dartmouth in numbers that are too high is pernicious. It was set against Jewish Americans in the 1920s. In fact, the same plan that Harvard uses today, according to analysis of it, is the one that is being used against Chinese Americans today. So we need to end this. This would be the Civil Rights Act 2.0, end discrimination. Unfortunately, California, again, a bad example almost in all areas, is considering Proposition 16, which would, again, allow, once the affirmative action, which is really, we should call it by its proper term, racial preferences, has been banned by vote of the Californians, but they keep bringing it back. So now with Proposition 16, they want to bring it back again. The Supreme Court is going to have to step in and end this nonsense because it is bad for the country. The same thing with the doctrine of disparate impact. Disparate impact says that any policy that has a disparate impact on the members of different groups, and remember, you can slice these groups any way you want, right? But if you have a disparate impact on a member of a group, then even if the policy was not, even if the intention was not racist, the policy is bad and must be ended. This is just another nonsense idea that has very nefarious consequences. We should end this as well. There are many things like this throughout the government. We should do an inventory of all the policies that we have in this country that make use of this doctrine and ask real hard questions. Is this needed? And I'm sure that in 99, if not 100% of all cases, it would not be needed. We should pursue discrimination. We should go back to Kennedy's idea of making sure the decisions are not based with regard to race, ethnicity, sex, or sexual orientation.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, though, that concerns me is that there seems to be a lack of will to express the kind of views that we're talking about, except, I mean, I guess it's expanding a little bit, thankfully. We're seeing more discussions that are happening. But at the same time, we're also seeing in the corporate world and local communities, local governments start to jump more and more on board with these ideas of the far left when it comes to identity politics and deciding, making determinations proactively that we need to embrace identity politics. Don't we need the will in our society here in this country to actually move forward with a civil rights movement 2.0 like you're talking about? And how optimistic are you, Mike Gonzalez, that we might actually get to that point, and sooner rather than later, hopefully before it would be even too late, where we can get more people saying, you know, maybe this isn't the way to go and we need to pursue an alternative path? Because especially with the Black Lives Matter stuff going on across the country, it seems like there are more and more pressures to do the opposite and to pursue identity politics.
Well, we need to expose what is going on. We need to expose who the Black Lives Matter organizations, not the slogan, which obviously something we all embrace, but the organizations are, which I've done in an essay in City Journal this week. But look, we have to consider that big corporations like regulation.
Yes,
because
we
they
made
can,
that point here before. Yes, absolutely right.
Right. They love regulation because then they have huge barriers of entry towards their competitors. They don't have to compete then with better services and better goods. Then all they have to do is compete for investors by cutting corners or offering better services and better products. And we're seeing already shoddy products. Try to call your bank and see how long you're left, waiting, and you're screaming, "Agent, I want to speak to an agent." And they know that there's nothing we can do. Try to change your provider for cable. So one of the reasons why the corporate world, Fortune 500, might be embracing these things is because they love big government and regulations. They'll be able to thrive. Americans have to understand this.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. One thing relative to that point, though, and I mean, I've made that point many times on this program, because fundamentally, when we're talking about regulation, if a business can pawn off responsibility on the government, say social media companies, if they can say, "Oh no, the government said we are not supposed to allow this particular speech," then that gives them an excuse not to allow that speech and just to put it off on the government and not have to face the controversy themselves. But also, it does push out the competition, makes it more difficult for others to get in on the market and so forth. So you're absolutely right on the regulatory point. We've made it many times, and Friedman has too. Go ahead.
Let me give you a prime example of this.
Yes.
2 weeks ago, Jack Dorsey of Twitter gave $10 million to Ibram X. Kendi, to his center at BU, at Boston University, with no strings attached. What is one of Kendi's most tyrannical proposals is to create a department, a government department of anti-racism that would only have professional people, no political appointees. They would then apply the disparate impact doctrine, but on steroids, to every policy passed by the U.S. government. And if any policy that is passed shows to have a disparate impact on anybody, then that policy would be rejected by the Department of Anti-Racism. Obviously, and obviously, there would also be a speech component to the Department of Anti-Racism. You can see Twitter benefiting from this.
No doubt. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. There are two final points I want to get in real quick, and I really appreciate your time, Mike Gonzalez. Just such a fascinating book and a fascinating and critically important discussion, especially to our society right now. One question is, the President of the United States, is there anything that the President himself can do by executive order to address some of the executive branch policies pre-existing, say, from 1977 and 1997 that could help to address this?
The President of the United States, whoever he or she is from any party, can rescind policy directive number 15 by OMB, which creates the ethno-racial pentagon that we have in this country, create mandates at all agencies, categorize people according to these 5 groups. That was then revised in 1997 to add Pacific Islanders. So we need to rescind both these policy directives and say, you can ask real questions. You can ask a question about national origin. That is a real thing. Cuba is a real country. Mexico is a real country. Ireland and Germany are real countries. You can ask if your parents or grandparents were born there. I would cap it at the 3rd generation. After that, we're all Americans anyway. If you come in and you naturalize, you're an American. You're no longer Korean or German or Cuban or Chinese.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I also want to ask you, I've been curious your thoughts on this. The Republican National Convention really featured a lot of diversity. We saw African-American speakers. We saw Hispanic speakers. We saw Asian American speakers. We saw a long array of diverse people who participated in the Republican National Convention. And I had a liberal on Twitter pose the question. He said, well, aren't the Republicans playing identity politics in their own way at the Republican National Convention? And I wanted to get your thoughts on that question. Do you think that they were doing that, or were they just showcasing that the Republican Party is in fact diverse?
I think I don't want to get into party politics. I think we should appeal to all Americans with American ideas. I think that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, for that matter, should go to all corners of the country and speak to all Americans and speak to their needs. We have a common humanity, and we have a common interest as common members of this great country. We have united purposes as Americans. Our leaders should speak to us in those terms as Americans with a united project.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And by dividing people up much more, you are ignoring that unifying force. I mean, it is e pluribus unum. Our national motto, you talk about this in your book, in The Plot to Change America, is being eroded by this idea of identity politics, going exactly to that point you just made.
I am the e pluribus unum fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
That's right. That's right. And it is, I'm so struck by how far these people have come in succeeding with identity politics up to this point, especially in terms of media, in terms of education, in terms of the corporate world as well, when it is so antithetical, Mike Gonzalez, to the very founding principles of this nation.
It is antithetical to the members, to the quote unquote victims. And by the way, nobody wants to have their children grow up into victims. What kind of thinking is this? You know, look, this is antithetical to everybody. And the reason why it's as long lasting as it has been is because it relies on myths. It relies on the myth that this is a clamor from the grassroots for recognition. It is nothing of the sort. It was imposed by the grass tops on the people down. It was imposed by activists. It is to this day. The people who benefit from this are the people who work for the ethnic affinity organizations. Another myth is that it is a result, which is a related myth, of the demographic change that came from the Hart-Celler Act in 1965. When these things were put in place, the demography had not changed whatsoever. For example, the first National Advisory Committee on Race at the census came in 1974, when the share of the foreign-born in this country was 4.5%, an all-time low.
Yeah.
So these are myths that we have to expose. The reason I wrote my book, The Plot to Change America, was to open people's eyes to these myths that keep getting propagated. And if you think that good-natured, good-hearted people in this country think, well, if people want recognition, why not give it to them? But this is not what is happening.
Yes.
And that is why I have written my book, The Plot to Change America, to in detail explain what has happened.
Just a final question for you, Mike Gonzalez, and it is one that I think is to me has been very fascinating, because Marxism has always been, or at least not always been, but for some time was about, let's have the lower class rise up together.
Right.
With common economic interests. This idea is a Marxist, it's still a Marxist ideology, and you talk about that in your book. But it's different in the sense that it really is breaking people up along these different racial and ethnic lines to achieve similar ends and objectives. But at the same time, what they're doing is they're also fostering divisions within what you would think would be their own leftist coalition. You talk in the book, for example, about feminists versus transgender and the divisions there and how they're manifesting themselves at this point in time. Can you speak just for a moment about the Marxist ideology and the division of people who you might think they might be focusing on bringing them together, but instead they're splitting them apart along these identitarian lines?
Right, because this is an idea that goes back to Gramsci and his theory of cultural hegemony. He realized while sitting in prison that the revolutions that Marx and Engels had promised would be non-ending had never happened, had only happened in one place, 1917, in a European backwater, Russia. And the reason he came up was he thought that the worker had accepted the cultural givens of his society, had accepted religion, the nation state, the economic system, and for that reason, the worker had false consciousness, quote unquote, and needed to go through consciousness raising exercises, which we see today happening across the country, which we talked about earlier. Then Herbert Marcuse came up with the idea. So that shifts from economics to culture. Herbert Marcuse comes up with the idea of working here in the United States, that look, the American worker is pathetic. He's too content. Capitalism has produced too good a way of life. But then he sees the riots and he says, it is with these identity groups that we're going to have a revolution, a long march through the institutions, as one of his disciples, Ruta Duchka, comes up with. and then it shifts the locus of revolution from the worker to the member of the identity groups. So you could have somebody who's incredibly wealthy, such as Oprah Winfrey, who in a classic Marxist analysis would be one of the bourgeoisie, one of the oppressors. She now, through this alchemy, becomes a victim.
Yes. And what I wonder is how long that can last, how tenable that kind of thing really is.
It depends on how well my book sells. Look,
Fair enough.
I am optimistic because Marxism it relies on a supremely vain, conceit that it can change human nature. It can create the new man. That's a phrase from Che Guevara. But we know from reading the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Bible, that people like Agamemnon and Ulysses and Sarah and Abraham are just like us. They have our same foibles as us. And they lived 5,000 years ago, were depicted 5,000 years ago. So human nature is unchanging. The Marxist, when the new man fails to show up, as the new man always does, he never comes out. Then the Marxist must rely on coercion and violence to push through his program. Yeah. Americans are too attached to freedom, to liberty, to put up with coercion and violence for too long. That is at base, where my optimism lies.
Folks, let's help him sell more of these books. Put it up on the screen one more time, Mr. Matoush. The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. And I cannot recommend it enough because it really does give you a perspective that gets to the fundamentals of how this developed over time and where we are at right now, as well as a pathway. This is what I think was so great, is you really give us a pathway, and we touched on it a bit here, Mike Gonzalez, towards how to reverse this trend, how to stop it now and get back to the cornerstones of this country. So I appreciate your time in the book.
Thank you very much to you and your listeners and your audience for tuning in and for having the opportunity to come on here. Thank
Absolutely. I will definitely want to have you back, sir. Thanks for your time and best of luck with the book.
Thank you. Bye.
Once again, Mike Gonzalez joining us, author of the book, The Plot to Change America. Be sure to check it out. I have to tell you, identity politics truly is antithetical to the American ideal. We've explored it in great depth today on this program because of that reason. It ignores, it sets aside, it derides the notion that you as an individual are and of right ought to be free to think, free to act, and free to choose. Because it doesn't look at you as an individual. If you're playing identity politics, that means you don't care about the individual, you care about the group. And it is not through some sort of well-meaning motivation either in many of these cases. I'm sure there are some who are playing identity politics because they think it's the right thing to do, because they've been taught that way. But the pernicious thing is that this really is, as Mike Gonzalez puts it, a plot to change America, and it is a plot that we must all be aware of, that goes against the foundations of this country. Once again, I'll say it again because it is Free to Choose Friday. We are and of right ought to be free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And identity politics must be eradicated in order to continue that ideal, to continue the principles upon which this nation was based. We all need to wake up. We all need to study this, read a book like The Plot to Change America by Mike Gonzalez. We need to talk to others and spread the word. Because it is not too late, but there might be a point at which we reach that point of no return. Hopefully not, and hopefully we stop it before then, but it's possible, unless we all rise up and do our part. Thank you so much for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads on this Free to Choose Friday. We're going to be taking a couple weeks vacation. When we come back on Monday, the 21st of September, we will be revved up and ready to go with some great programs. Do not miss it. Consider this a sort of season finale back in a couple of weeks here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Once again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. My thanks to Mike Gonzalez, to producer extraordinaire Nathan Matuse, to our partners at the Washington Examiner, and to you for liking, subscribing, and please sharing our content. We appreciate your support. Have a great Labor Day weekend. See you in a couple weeks, and may God bless America.